Thank you for joining in this conversation. You just finished teaching a course for our students in the postgraduate program in sports management. The course is Social Production and Consumption of Sport. I've, I was happy to attend some of your classes. What are some of the key takeaways that you want our students to take from this course?
Well, let me just say is that it's been a delight to be here in Mumbai and be part of the Jio Institute and for the launch program in sports management.
Thank you.
And with regard to the students, I think the two takeaway messages which we've wanted to relay to them is that firstly, that any study of sport, which is not a study of the society in which it's located, is a study out of context. So you have to play sport in the context of Indian society, or indeed in with regard to any other society. So that's the first one. But secondly, we've also tried to convey to them that you can't have normal sport in an abnormal society.
Mm-hmm.
And we can give examples of an abnormal society in the context of apartheid, South Africa. There,
right.
It was an abnormal society. Normal sport couldn't exist within that context.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Of course, you have to understand that I'm a professor of management, general management, so I really don't know sports research that much. But yesterday in the class, I was fascinated by this topic of race and ethnicity in sport. And, what does the research tell us about, the influence of race or, and as you call it, ethnicity, and what is the distinction between these two when related to sports?
Well, of course, for the non-academic, for the general layperson in society, they have already preconceived ideas based upon the color of the skin of the person.
That's right.
And as a result of which, of course, they then act on the basis of those assumptions. In natural science, of course, there is a big debate about the notion of race, how many races there are, whether such racial groups actually are as hard and fast as common sense might suggest they would be. And indeed, modern genetic research suggests that there's as great a diversity within an ethnic group as there are between. So as a result of which, that makes the analysis even more complex. There's no easy way of trying to explain sport performance, either in terms of its consumption or actual delivery, through the notion of race.
So, to give an example, for example, I think that, say, basketball is dominated by Black Americans. Or in India, we have this notion that wrestlers come from a particular region in India because they are very successful in the national as well as international arena. So, what am I missing?
Well, I think what one's missing is, of course, the idea that you can explain these performances, which look so natural, through a natural explanation. That is, that it's something that they're hardwired, that they're born into. Whereas in actual fact, we socially learn to be wrestlers. We socially learn to be basketball players. There's nothing in our DNA which makes us better or worse basketball players. One vivid example you might give from the United States, as you were indicating with regard to basketball. Of course, the ability to jump might be seen because most basketball players might be seen to be black, but the ability to jump in volleyball is also equally important.
That's
right. But the majority of volleyball players are white.
That's right. You're right. Yeah. So, in other words, what you're saying is it is not a simple answer, but there are multiple factors that give rise to the rise of a sport or the success in a particular sport. And, depending on the ecosystem that a particular sport is immersed in, all these factors play a role. In which case, then even there must be change over time. So, for example, some sports may become more popular or less popular over time as dictated by the conditions in which the sport is located. Is that right?
That's certainly the correct answer. And in fact, when you consider, again, if we stay with the sport of basketball, in the historical past, Irish Americans, Italian Americans used to dominate that sport. Over the course of time, the demographics of the people who play the game changes. And indeed now, of course, there's a mixture of different ethnic groups, but the majority group would be Black Americans. If you then look at the fortunes of different sports, sports ebb and flow in terms of their popularity. Sometimes it might be that the success of a national team or the way in which, of course, a domestic league is organized and structured. From India, we can think of examples. Field hockey, where once India were a prominent field hockey nation, were successful in the Olympic Games, and that would have been in the post-war period, but gradually, over time, that success faded away. It's only in more recent times, particularly with the women's field hockey team, that they've become more successful. The transformation of a game like cricket, which was always popular, of course, in India and in the old Empire Commonwealth nations, has been transformed by the way in which the IPL has been restructured as a financial branding operation, which actually attracts now players from all around the world, and where, of course, it's marketed to a huge audience here in India, and where it's now consumed in different parts of the world through the Indian diaspora, but also through places in England and elsewhere.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great example. Now, many traditional games and sports in India, like Kabaddi or Kho-Kho, again, are receiving the business attention and therefore are coming back to prominence again. I think, again, that underlines the importance of the ecosystem, in which a sport is, immersed in. I want to now move to a different topic, which is again, very, very, I would say, interesting. So we see a lot of incidents of, people call it drug use and, ethical issues in sport to enhance sports performance and so on. So, again, how do we deal with a problem like this? Is it a question of awareness, or is it a question of something beyond that? What do you think?
Well, one of the things we always say to our students, which would be that words are as important as numbers. And with regard to that, of course, people assume or associate drugs and sport as a bad thing, but that's not always the case. For instance, with restorative drug use or restorative medical interventions, it might be that you're treating an illness or an injury.
That's right.
So in those instances, of course, we're happy and content to actually use medicine or drugs in order to restore our health and well-being. On the other hand, of course, when we then focus upon performance-enhancing drugs, that can actually be either at the level of the individual taking a drug, knowingly or otherwise, or it can be state-sponsored. And there's a world of difference between the individual who does so, perhaps because he or she is driven by a desire to succeed, and or where it's a state which actually has organized its own medical resources in order to not only win medals, but enhance the reputation or the prestige of a state, provided, of course, they don't get caught.
Yeah, I agree. And however, if you look at the good side of it, so if there is better management of sports, better support for sports, and better awareness among athletes and sports persons, actually it could be in other words, it's actually needed in order to use the right support for sports, isn't it?
Well, indeed, because of course, education with regard to these matters is a key. I said, of course, earlier that we talk about words being as important as numbers. We can draw across the issue of drugs with regard to recreational drugs, restorative drugs, and then performance-enhancing drugs. In each of those areas, young athletes actually require education with regard to consider the distribution of knowledge through leaflets, through conversation, through dialogue, through good role models. In each of those sorts of areas, by actually improving knowledge, you improve understanding, and hopefully in that situation they make better ethical decisions.
Absolutely. So, in other words, there is a very close connection between developments in health sciences and probably sports management.
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, with regard to health exercise and health science more broadly, without which, of course, you find that the management of sport is diminished. Let me give you one very good example, if I may, which is we know from the evidence that regular exercise actually improves our cardiorespiratory, our cardiovascular systems on the one hand, and in addition to which reduces diseases like diabetes, which of course is very prevalent here in India.
That's right.
So regular exercise, we know from our health science research, is important. However, if we don't have the management of the message effectively delivered, then people don't change either their diet or their exercise and lifestyle patterns. So when we put the two together, we're more likely to reduce the incidence of disease, which actually in the longer term benefits not only the individual or the community, but also actually the economics of the society. The state has to pay less on medical interventions.
That's right.
So prevention is better than dealing with the consequences.
That's right. So, how did you like teaching our students?
I loved it. They're actually engaged, enthusiastic, and they ask the right sort of questions. They're interested and keen to learn, which is, of course, always something which we as those who teach want students to do.
That's right. I completely agree with you. And we look forward to, your coming and teaching our students again. And first, thank you for joining in this conversation. How did you like our food in India?
It's been a challenge, but that's not because of your food. It's because of my Irish identity and past.
I can understand that. Thank you. Thank you once again for joining in this conversation.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of those who've actually made me so welcome here in my visit to Mumbai over the last week.
Thank you. It's our pleasure.